So the mechanical ignition advance mechanism is one of the more neglected parts of your motorcycle. A lot of people don't know where it is and what it does, and that they have to be in tip-top shape in order for them to work properly. The point of the advance mechanism is to change when the spark plug fires as the engine speeds up, therefore advancing the spark, and also they call retarding the spark as you slow the engine down. So right here on the bench we have a couple examples from a few different bikes. So we have a 369 example from a 360, we have a 312 out of a 350 Honda, and we have this 323 example out of a 550. Now they're all very similar in constructions, but there are different details how they're put together. So the way this little gizmo works is it's spinning inside the engine, and as it spins, these weights fling out via centrifugal force. When they fling out, the center cam moves a few degrees, and that changes when the spark plug fires. So this mechanism has to run nice and smooth and evenly, because every time you speed the engine up, it flings out. Every time you bring the engine back to idle, it relaxes. So some of the issues that can cause trouble on your bike if this mechanism isn't working properly are as follows. Now if the mechanism is stuck in the full advance position, that means the weight's out, the bike will never want to return back to idle speed properly. It always has a high idle. Now, if it is the opposite and they're relaxed, well, the engine may not rev up properly. Now, it could be stuck in between and you kind of get an in-between thing, but really this mechanism has to run nice and clean. Now, a lot of people talk about the springs being worn out, and they can wear out, but we don't recommend tightening them up because that changes when the weights swing out. Now, most of these mechanisms are designed to swing out at full advance here once the engine reaches about 3,500 RPM. So don't go ahead and tighten the springs up. It's going to change what we call the spark advance curve on the engine. It's best to find another mechanism that is in good shape. So I'm going to point out a few details here on each of these mechanisms that you may not realize are there on purpose. And of course, the Honda manuals do not talk about this whatsoever. Every one of these has a reference mark on this cam here. This is the cam that actually triggers the points in relation to the body of the mechanism. So in this particular one right here, we have a small little dot on the very edge of this cam, right here. However, on the back side of the mechanism, we have a little half-round notch. What this means is, in this particular mechanism, that dot lines up with the notch. Now, that's not always the case depending on the advanced mechanism. There'll always be some kind of reference, but they could be different. So let's take a look at this 312 here out of a 350. This one happens to have a little line instead of a dot here, but the notch is over here. It's off by a few degrees, but it's still there. Now, the reason we want to pay attention to the line reference, the dot, and the half notch is this cam can be put on backwards. Let me show you. I can take this off, I can rotate it 180 degrees and reinstall it, and now my dot on the cam is over here and my notch is over here. Now if you put this together backwards, you'll never be able to get the bike to time properly, and you'll pull your hair out. What's going on? It's a very slight detail that's not covered. So as you take your advanced mechanism apart, pay attention to what direction the little index mark is on your cam in relation to the base. So on this one, on these 312 styles, or the other ones that are in the 350s, my rule of thumb on them is if I was to draw a horizontal line through the mechanism, both dots are on the same side of the line. Let's look at this 323 mechanism out of a CB550. Here's my index dot on the cam right here. However, instead of a half round notch, what we have is a little hole drilled in the base here. Again, it is an orientation mark to make sure you put this in correctly, because this can be taken off, spun 180 degrees, and it'll be out of phase, which again, you will never get the engine to be in time properly. So before you take these apart, make note of what direction it's going in. It may not be a 1-for-1, it might be just close. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this 323 advanced mechanism, and we're going to take it apart and clean it and lubricate it to get it ready to go back on the bike. All right, so we're apart here, and you can see this hasn't really been cleaned quite some time. It had some old grease in it, but we're going to clean that off and put some fresh grease in there. What's important to note here in this particular one is inside this chamber here, there is a small machined groove. So this groove is actually a reservoir for grease. That's where the extra grease is going to live inside this mechanism, and I can tell that this one is caked full of some old grease. I'm going to scrape around there with my screwdriver. Yeah, got some old, kind of dried out grease in there. So we'll get this all cleaned out. We're going to pack it full of fresh grease. The other things to consider is not only does this cam move this way on the mechanism, but also the weights are pivoting on here. So these also need to be lubricated. Okay, let's put this thing back together now. We've got one shim on each of the pivots on the bottom. 1, 2. Take a little bit of bearing grease here. I'm going to grease up those posts, because that's where those weights pivot. A little bit of grease on there. Or this one right here. Grease it up. Drop it on here, and that grease is going to help hold it in place as well. Now comes this big mamu. Put some more grease here. And we get inside. Really. I'm going to stop right there. Get some coming out, no big deal. One. 2. 3. There we go. I put my excessive grease here. Extra grease. All right, that's clean, put together, lubricated, and it's ready to go back on the bike. This is Brendan here with Common Motor. That's common-motor.com on the internet. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Subscribe to our newsletter via our website, and of course, subscribe to this YouTube channel down below, and we'll see you next time.